On this episode, how we as people predict the future, why we're very bad at predicting the future, what that means for water-sensitive urban design, and why this makes me really positive that we will find the water-sensitive city, whatever that happens to look like, and we'll manage to implement it. Hey everyone, and welcome back to Ideanthro. And welcome back to another That's Like WSUD episode, where we take an idea or a concept that we've read about, heard about, or otherwise come across, and apply it back to water-sensitive urban design. Today's concept relates to how we as people try and predict the future, how we go about predicting the future, and how we're actually very, very bad at doing it, because all we do is we take recent past events and extrapolate them forwards. And this really bears no relationship to what actually happens in the future. The idea and the reason this is on my mind today is from this audiobook that I've been listening to. It is The Rational Optimist by Matt Ridley. And to get you into this, give you a taste of what's got me thinking about this, I'm going to play about a 2-minute snippet of the audiobook for you so you can hear it for yourselves, and then we'll talk about how it applies to water-sensitive urban design.
The pessimist's mistake is extrapolationism, assuming that the future is just a bigger version of the past. As Herb Stein once said, if something cannot go on forever, then it will not. So, for example, the environmentalist Lester Brown, writing in 2008, was pessimistic about what will happen if the Chinese are by 2030 as rich as the Americans are now. If, for example, each person in China consumes paper at the current American rate, then in 2030, China's 1.46 billion people will need twice as much paper as is produced worldwide today. There go the world's forests. If we assume that in 2030 there are 3 cars for every 4 people in China, as there now are in the United States, China will have 1.1 billion cars. The world currently has 860 million cars. To provide the needed roads, highways, and parking lots, China would have to pave an area comparable to what it now plants in rice. By 2030, China would need 98 million barrels of oil a day. The world is currently producing 85 million barrels a day, and may never produce much more than that. There go the world's oil reserves. Brown is dead right with his extrapolations, but so was the man who, probably apocryphally, predicted 10 feet of horse manure in the streets of London by 1950. So was IBM's founder, Thomas Watson, when he said in 1943 that there was a world market for 5 computers, and Ken Olsen, the founder of Digital Equipment Corporation, when he said in 1977, there is no reason anyone would want a computer in their home. Both remarks were true enough when computers weighed a ton and cost a fortune. Even when the British Astronomer Royal and the British government space advisors said that space travel was respectively bunk and utter bilge just before Sputnik flew, they were not wrong when they said it. Just the world changed rather soon after they said it. It is the same with modern predictions of impossibility, like Lester Brown's. Paper and oil will all have to be used more frugally, or replaced by something else by 2030, and land will have to be used more productively.
And that's the gist of Matt Ridley's point here, is that we, as a species, we look to the past in order to predict the future. And this is understandable, but that it presents some really, really large problems in a rapidly changing and rapidly evolving world. It doesn't necessarily present any problems if, say, you're a hunter-gatherer living in the Neolithic period, where every ancestor you can possibly think of, and the many that came before that that you don't even know of, and all your children and likely descendants coming after you are going to be hunter-gatherers, have been hunter-gatherers, and will be hunter-gatherers. None of them are likely to stumble across a laptop anytime soon. But this presents a problem in our rapidly changing and rapidly evolving world, when we look to the future. And it presents more of a problem when we're trying to better that world through concepts such as water-sensitive urban design, although I know for a fact that Matt Ridley wasn't thinking about water-sensitive urban design specifically when he mentioned this. But with topics such as water-sensitive urban design, because, at least in their initial phases, not everything goes right. So we're at this situation at the moment. And I should say, before I go any further, I first became aware of this concept of water-sensitive urban design and how it related to people predicting the future when Sarah Jones, when we both worked at Healthy Waterways, Sarah pointed this out to me in the context of some of the workshops we were running, which is, okay, we're trying to run workshops to try and figure out what to do next with water-sensitive urban design, but given this human tendency to just look at the past and extrapolate it forward, that makes it really tough to run a workshop to try and come up with whatever the next step forward is. And as I'll point out later in this video, in hindsight, I actually think it makes a good argument for why a workshop is not the right way, or at least in many instances the way we run workshops is not the right way to go about trying to do that. But anyway, the point here is we've had, widespread implementation of stormwater treatment in the guise of water-sensitive urban design in Australia for about 10 years or so now. It's been happening to some degree earlier and before that. We've had it for about 10 years. And in that implementation, lots of good stuff's happened, but lots of bad stuff has happened. And if you like something that I did when I was early on in my career, I sat down and I looked at, I worked at Logan City Council, and I looked at the amount of bioretention systems we were building, and I looked at the amount of development predicted for Logan over the next, at that stage we were doing 40 years. And I did a few sums, assumed it was all treated with bioretention systems, and I really quickly came to the point where I was like, wow, that's an awful lot of bioretention we're going to build. It was 1 million square meters by 2050 was the number. And suddenly you're like, wow, how will we pay to maintain that? How much is that going to cost? Is that sustainable? And you start to get into these thoughts of going, how will we possibly do that? Which is fair enough, because it's that future that we predicted there is a real challenge. But it's made this fundamental flaw of assuming that the future is just a derivative of the past. Now, where this is particularly important to consider here is that what I'm observing happening at the moment is that people are doing those calculations. They're looking at our current trajectory of water-sensitive urban design, and they're going, yeah, that's not really sustainable, is it? We can't really afford to do that. And they're right. Just before anyone thinks that I'm going to somehow make a defense of our current approach. No. The current approach is unsustainable. And anyone who does those numbers and realizes that and says so is right. But then where I think things go astray here is we go, well, it's really common for people to go, well, we better not do it because it's not sustainable, so why should we do it? Let's just, it was fine that we tried it, hasn't worked, let's just move on. Or, more commonly, what I'm seeing at the moment is a look at, okay, it hasn't worked, well, the numbers are too big, we've got too many assets. Here's what we'll do. We'll prioritise which catchments or prioritise which somethings, some way to scale down the number of assets that we're building to a reasonable number, a number that we can sustain. So let's find out what all the high value waterways that we care about are, and let's focus just on those, and we'll let the others go. Although no one says we'll let the others go, it's just we'll focus on the high value waterways. But this is also problematic because it fails to predict what will actually happen in either the we'll do nothing scenario or the we'll just focus on the high value waterway scenario. It actually fails to play forward what's going to happen there. And that's exactly the same problem which at the very end of this Matt Ridley points out, which is that the current future isn't sustainable. And that what that will necessitate in the future is changes. But it doesn't mean that just do a little bit. It will necessitate big changes in the same way that China's, growth will mean lots more paper used or lots more oil used if we go down the same track. What that will necessitate is changes to the way we as a society, the whole world, uses paper and oil. The same thing applies here with water-sensitive urban design. It's not because our society is built upon the ecological foundations of the planet here, because our society sits on the planet and on its ecological foundation, we simply can't go and destroy that foundation. So the concept that, we initially recognized that we were doing damage to our planet with urban areas, and therefore we started to implement water-sensitive urban design, but that's the way we're currently doing it's not cost-effective. The thought that our jump then goes to, well, we'll just do it in a few spots, is bonkers. Because it fails to recognize that we have to do something. That if we do nothing, we erode the ecological foundation upon which our society sits. So once we eliminate the continue down the current path and the do nothing or do just a little bit paths, then we're left with the only viable option here. And it's worth considering something from the famous man himself, Sherlock Holmes here, which is essentially, once you've eliminated all the sensible options, I'll paraphrase here, once you've eliminated all the obvious options, whatever is left, however improbable, however unreasonable it seems, has to be the truth. And so what this leads us towards is this. Well, look, we're not going to be successful going down just the current path of bioretention in its current form, in its current manner. But equally, the other option, which people seem to swing back to immediately once they recognize that, when they predict forward and go, we're currently doing this, the future looks like this, that's not sustainable, do nothing. Or do a little. What that fails to miss is the blindingly obvious other option, which is that we find another future that is water sensitive, which is what we were aiming for in the first place, and had our first little tickle of that with bioretention systems. What it fails to miss is that we will find an alternative future that is water sensitive, but it just doesn't look like anything we've currently seen before. And this is where our problem with trying to predict the future is like. Because we predict the future based on what we've seen in the past and extrapolating forward, it doesn't help us to find what that future is. We can't see that future because it doesn't look like anything in the past, but it will happen. In exactly the same way the fellow from IBM, quoted in this, says there'll only ever be 5 computers in the world, or where the other fellow quoted in there, sorry I can't remember the names, the other fellow quoted says, no one's ever going to want a laptop at home. I mean, come on. That in hindsight's proven, like it was a sensible statement at the time when computers were giant and big and clumsy and actually not that powerful compared to this laptop over here. It was a sensible statement at the time, but extrapolate that forward to now and you look back on it and go, that was ridiculous. And this is exactly the same thing that's going to happen in water-sensitive urban design. With just the information we have at hand, the logical response is, it's all too hard. But it's missing the fact that we are terrible at predicting the future. And that there is, in this interconnected world that we have, there is, in my opinion, when the option of either the current approach is no good, do nothing is no good, then what it means is there's a solution that we need to find, and it is out there, and that is the only viable option. And so this is useful for us working in any kind of policy space, any kind of water-sensitive urban design space, because we can use it to direct our next steps and our next actions in this space. Because we can use it to go, okay, let's make sure that whatever step we take next heads us towards that sustainable water-sensitive outcome and not simply away from the current problem. So if the current problem is that the current approach to water-sensitive urban design isn't sustainable, we have 2 options. We can either look for the future approach that is sustainable, truly sustainable, but really hard to predict, really hard to see, because we're not good at predicting the future. Or the other option we have, which is, well, let's just back away from the bits of this current scenario that we don't like. It makes it really clear for us to go, is it that, or is it that? Is it that? Oh, it's got to be the top one. The top one is the only viable option here. Defining the future that we can't currently see is the only viable option. Which then leads us to a dilemma. if we can't see what that future is, and if we're no good at predicting it based on past events because it's, by its very nature, going to be different to what we've been doing to date, how do we find it? That is a very, very, very good question. But for this, we do have historical precedents. We can look to the past to understand that, and then to guide what we do in this unknown past. This is getting to be like a little bit like we have known unknowns and known knowns, but bear with me. What we can do is look to the past and look at how other things were invented. And the way so much invention happens in this world, it doesn't come out of thin blue air. What it comes from is the joining together of two or more disparate and previously separate ideas. For example, what example do we want to give? Okay, we'll do a dramatically simplified version of this. The mobile phone comes from bringing together the concept of the personal computer and the old-fashioned normal telephone. Anyone who was sitting down in the early days of either the phone, like the really early, really, really early, but anyone sitting there with a dial-up phone and predicting what the future of the phone would be, would not have been able to see that the future was this. They might have seen futures of different coloured dial-up phones. They might have seen dial-up phones that, maybe they had different ringtones. Maybe they were a little bit easier to see. But they wouldn't have seen the giant jump that got us to this thing. And similarly, people sitting down in the early days of making laptops, where they were much bigger bricks than this thing is, and weren't particularly powerful, neither of them would have seen the jump to this thing. And yet, by bringing together the two different ideas of the dial-up phone and the laptop over here, we ended up with this phone. This is the way that new ideas and new inventions come to be. It's by bringing together disparate ideas. Now, whether that is our current practice of doing bioretention and, say, some new research that comes along, or whether it's something else, it might be research, it might be partly practice, it could be going out to a completely different discipline and learning what they've done, but it's by bringing together otherwise disparate ideas that this occurs. Now, the fortunate thing for us is that with our modern society, we have never, ever, ever, ever been better placed to make this happen. Because of the wonder of the internet, because of the wonder of things like this video here, because of the wonder of the telephone, because of the interconnected society in which we live, we have never had, because of the fact that there are more people alive on the planet today than ever before, and therefore more brains working in more different fields to possibly bring together in more different ways, we have never been better placed to find a solution to whatever a water-sensitive city is. Think about that for a minute. Now, there might be people in the future who are better placed than us to solve it, but we are better placed than anyone who has ever come before us to solve this problem, because we are better connected, and there are more different fields to try and reconnect to solve this, and more people to do it than ever before. And so how do we make that happen? How do we make that happen? Well, let's take a little sidestep here into neuroscience. Let's take a little sidestep into neuroscience, and let's think about on the personal level how ideas come to be. So it's really common for us as people to think that we've got this great big mammalian brain that has logic and can think and can work through problems. But that's not necessarily where new ideas have come from. You're listening to this, you're thinking about this. Have you had the experience where you've been in the shower and suddenly, poof, eureka moment, something makes sense to you? You've been thinking about something all day, you've been struggling with this problem at work, you can't solve it, it's really bothering you, you go to the shower and poof, the solution pops into your mind. That is more akin to how new ideas, like this phone, come to be, than really strong conscious thought is. Because what happens here, from an idea generation point of view, from a neuroscience point of view, people are really good. We have two types of brains. We have the conscious brain and we have the subconscious brain. The conscious brain being the one that you're aware of, the one in my head right now is thinking about exactly what I'm about to say ahead of me. And then we have the subconscious that is also doing lots of really useful stuff, but we have no physical control and no physical knowledge of it. And so when we sit down and we think about a problem, it's the conscious brain that's doing it. And the conscious brain is great for that reasoning, but that takes a lot of power to consciously reason things through. And therefore, it doesn't have a lot of bandwidth to like move outside that. It's like the whole thing that, people say, you can't multitask. You can only do one or maybe two things at once. That's because the conscious brain is really good at focusing specifically and deeply, and thinking about stuff deeply, but not good at broadening out. The subconscious brain, on the other hand, you have no control over. So you can't think deeply and you can't reason with things, but that frees up a lot more processing power in the subconscious brain. And it can use that processing power to work on stuff in the background and to make connections between different ideas. It's just about giving it time. Well, it's about giving it two things. It's about giving it the food to bring things together, and then creating the space for it to pop forward and pop up into the conscious mind of which you're aware of it. And this is what happens when you have a eureka moment in the shower. When you have a eureka moment in the shower, you've been thinking about something at work all day, the conscious brain's been grinding through it the whole time, and then you come to the shower, you have the eureka moment. What that was is you've come to the shower, you've stepped under the warm water, you've relaxed for a minute, you've gone, the conscious mind switched off. In that moment you went, the conscious mind has switched off, and the subconscious has a moment to come to the fore. And it's been ticking away in the background all day, but by switching off the conscious mind, the subconscious comes to the fore and goes, boom, connects the ideas. Because it's got extra processing power, it's able to take the disparate ideas that you've been thinking about and puts them together like that. And it's that snap that's the eureka moment. And so this is really useful if we can understand that, then it's really useful when we come back to the original problem here, which is how do we create a water sensitive future when we can't predict what that future is? Because it tells us the methodology for which to get there. So let's recap where we're at. People are not very good at predicting the future because the day and age that we live in, things are changing very quickly. And instead what we do problematically is we look to the past and we create derivatives of that in the future when we try and predict what the future is. But because the future is changing so quickly, the future is always different to that derivative of the past. And that's a problem for water sensitive urban design because our current approaches to date are not sustainable. They are costing us too much and we're not doing enough. This is the problem. It's costing us too much and then we're not doing anywhere near enough of it either. That's a really vexing problem, right? So we look at that and go, it's all too hard, because we predict a future where that's too costly and getting us no outcomes, and we're like, we're stuffed. But once we understand how the brain comes up with new ideas, by bringing together disparate different ideas from different fields, and thinking about them hard, but then stepping back for a moment to create the space for the subconscious to bring them together, then we can start to understand that it is possible to find a water-sensitive future. And we can start to guide our actions and go, okay, what we need to do is to recognize that what we've done to date was good because we learnt stuff from that. And we need to take those learnings and combine them with as many different ideas as we possibly can and try and jam them together into as many different possibilities. And at first, that's going to seem really, really tough because we're going to be grinding through it with our subconscious. But then at some point, whether it's in the shower, whether it's in a great conversation with a colleague, whether it's while you're out for a run, at some point, the moment's going to be right where the brains, either one person's brain or several people's brains collectively, are going to form the connection to figure out what this new thing in water-sensitive urban design, in the water-sensitive city is, and that will become the future that we can't predict. And this is why I'm actually really positive about this discipline, despite the fact that our current approaches to date clearly aren't sustainable, and despite the fact that doing nothing is clearly not sustainable either, but people seem to think that's what we need to do. I am really positive about this field because I feel that I understand the process by which we find that future that we can't currently see. And that process is really simple. Bring together disparate ideas, create the space for them to snap together, and that is where that impossible, unimaginable future will come from. And we will look back in 5 years or 10 years and go, it's kind of obvious in hindsight. And that's where I want to leave this episode. Thank you for tuning in. What do you think of that? Have you had that experience before, that eureka moment in the shower or out for a run where you've had, solved a problem like that? Have you had that before? Because that's the moment that I think we need to solve our water-sensitive urban design issues. Have you had that experience before where you've tried to predict the future, but it's turned out nothing like it? Yeah, so you understand the problem that we're facing here. But the key is that if you understand both of those, if you understand the eureka moment and you understand the derivative, like the problem of how we predict the future based on derivatives of the past, you are equipped with all the tools we need to find a water-sensitive future. Sweet, thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next time.